In 2 recent interviews, super investor Mohnish Pabrai said this about investing in Alibaba versus Tencent. He said, originally I had invested in Alibaba, but then I subsequently studied Tencent. My opinion was that Tencent was a superior company to Alibaba on a few different fronts. Hi everyone, JJ here with the Art of Value. Welcome. What Pabrai said about Alibaba versus Tencent was from an interview in late June and one back in February. So let's dig into what else he said about investing in Alibaba versus Tencent. I switched the BABA position to Prosus, which is basically a Tencent bet, and I'll talk about what Prosus is in a minute. I just found there was a big difference in business quality and leadership. Pabrai mentioned that he invested in Tencent through Prosus, which is a global technology investment group headquartered in Amsterdam. It's got the ticker PRX. Prosus owns shares in a variety of technology companies, including South African media company Naspers. By far its biggest investment is Tencent, and it actually owns about 26% of Tencent. Prosus was actually a spin-off from Naspers, and it was created to invest in international assets like Tencent, and they say they've got no plans to sell Tencent anytime soon. Now, if we look at the Prosus share price quickly, we can see it's up 9.2% over the past year. And if we look back over the past 4 years, we can see it's down 6.8%, so not a great performance over that time. Now, digging into more about what Pabrai said about Tencent and specifically its leader Pony Ma, he said this: I would say Pony Ma, who's the co-founder and CEO of Tencent, is one of the greatest entrepreneurs ever to come about. He is truly an exceptional person in the last 100 years in business. I think he's very much an off-the-charts person in terms of what he has built and how he has executed. Now, under Pony Ma's leadership, Tencent has become one of the most successful technology companies in the world, and its products and services are used by billions of people. Now, if you haven't heard much from Pony Ma before, it's because he's got a low-key personality, but under the radar, and he's got a focus on long-term strategy. But he's known for his willingness to experiment with new technology and new business models within the companies, the businesses that they nurture and build within Tencent. He's also known for being a strong advocate for China's internet sector, and he's encouraged the government to be more supportive of the sector in the past. And he has, of course, become one of China's richest people, and he's well respected by business leaders around the world, including investors like Pabrai. Now, Pabrai said in the most recent interview that the investments of BABA and then Tencent haven't worked out for him so far. He said this: Alibaba and Tencent have not worked out for me, partially because, or probably mainly because, there were a lot of changes that came about from government regulations and government directives. Now, he's very likely referring to that crackdown on the internet sector, on internet companies that the Chinese government had for quite a long time. The stocks went down. They haven't recovered, although they've eased back on that now, but the stocks haven't recovered yet. And now the economy's seemingly in a bit of trouble there, so there's worries about that. So it's been a long haul for investors in Chinese internet companies for sure, Chinese technology sector in general. Now, the Chinese interviewer asked Pabrai if there was a China discount. What's the buy-in opportunity, she asked. And Pabrai responded by saying, I think that it was not a factor a few years ago, and it is a significant factor today. It definitely has an impact, and probably a negative impact that did not exist a few years ago. He said a lot of that is hard to predict, but I would say that Tencent is kind of a very flexible company which can look at circumstances that are there in a number of different ways and can adjust its operations accordingly. So, for example, when they were facing a number of restrictions in China, they just increased their activity outside China. Now, about investing in Alibaba now, he said this: I think a number of things that Alibaba would, in my opinion, for me, fall into the too hard pile. Now, of course, you got the too hard pile from Warren Buffett, who says they have 3 piles. They have no, they have yes, and they have too hard. And many companies go into the too hard pile. They want things to be easy. They want simple investments. They don't look for complexity. They don't think it's better because if you work it out, the puzzle, it's better. They just look for easy things. And Pabrai is saying here that BABA is just too hard for him. Now, if you're getting value out of this episode so far, please don't forget to like on YouTube or on Twitter too, to help with visibility, with the algorithm, to help spread it to more people. Thanks. He talks about this more. It's very hard to handicap what the CCP does with them. So there, I think Tencent is a little bit different in the sense that they've always been very cooperative with the government. They've had very great relationships with the government. And I think BABA, for the most part, from what I can tell, has fixed a lot of those issues, but I don't believe their relationship with the government is as good even today. So what I think he's saying that in his opinion, that Tencent has an easier ride with the government, the all-important relationship with the Chinese government for these companies. Tencent has an easier ride than Alibaba does. Could also be referring to Pony Ma versus Jack Ma there. Jack Ma from Alibaba had a lot of problems with the Chinese government. He was very outspoken. He was very confident in his speech, and then when the crackdown came, he was definitely on the outer. He left China for a while and he stopped working with Alibaba, and there were a lot of problems with Ant Financial there. They did get into trouble, which seems to have eased off now, but he's saying that Tencent has a much better relationship in that regard. Pabrai also said that Pony Ma and Tencent have done an extremely good job with R&D, developing products and services in-house and being able to scale those and making great investments and making great partnerships worldwide, really. So to kind of sum up, he said that if he were to do anything in China, it would be Tencent because of the nature of the entrepreneur and the nature of the team and the nature of the business. And of course, he is invested. If he's still invested in Tencent instead of Alibaba, he said he sold Alibaba, so he's made his choice there. Now, I'd love to know what you think. Do you think that Tencent or Alibaba will be the better investment, say, over the next 5 years? Which is the better company? Which will do better? Let me know in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter in the mentions. He also goes on to say that he has investment opportunities around the world. He looks globally, so China is just one place. He mentions Turkey, which he's talked about a lot lately, having investments in Turkey. Racis is one of those companies, but he also talks about the United States. He said he recently found 2 companies in the United States, and I talked about that in a recent video about guru portfolios, super investor portfolios for the last quarter, 13F filings, and it was revealed that he had 2 coal companies in the US that were pretty attractive to him. So go and see that. If you haven't seen that already, I did go into more detail there. So he says he's not stuck to one particular geography, and he says size is also a factor. He said these companies, Tencent, Alibaba, and Maotai, which he talked about earlier in the interview, which he had an investment in, but he sold. These are big companies. So he says he's looking for smaller companies. So talking about Maotai and Tencent, he said both have very reasonable valuations and they are not overvalued. The market caps of both companies make them amongst the largest businesses in the world though. So what that means is that there are very few businesses that will get to the market cap of 2 trillion or 3 trillion or 4 trillion. 4 trillion doesn't even exist today. Apple was hovering around 3 trillion, but even a trillion is a lot. He says, I do have a concern about the law of large numbers. One of the advantages an individual investor has is that if you have a small pool of capital, you may be able to identify a company that can become 10, 20, 50 times larger than what it is, but it is difficult for a company like Tencent or Maotai to become 10 times larger in the next few years. I think that would be almost impossible. So he's talking about looking for smaller companies. This is something that Chris Mayer talks about in 100 Baggers too. The smaller the better, because if you're looking for 10, 20, 30, 100x companies in the future, then is a company that's $1 trillion or even a mega cap lower than that really going to be able to grow that much? Some people think so, and we didn't have $1 trillion companies before just a few years ago, but now we do, and we have multi-trillion dollar companies, so they can get bigger. But he's saying, what's the probability that they're really going to be able to grow 10x, 20x? If you're looking for that, it seems practically impossible. So looking for smaller companies is better, but harder to find those ones that haven't won yet, as Terry Smith would say. He looks for companies that have already won and they're usually bigger. So looking for smaller companies is tough, and looking for small great companies is also tough because capitalism is brutal and things can happen along the way. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to put links to 2 previous Alibaba videos that have been popular. Go and see one of those now if you haven't already. I'll put it in the description for those who are watching or listening elsewhere. And thanks for watching or listening this time, and I'll see you in the next one.